So this game is called Succession. The art is by Phil Foglio, at least the character drawings, and that's a big part of what attracted me to it. I actually mistakenly didn't look too carefully, thought maybe he designed the game itself, and that would have been a kick as well because he's got a very twisted mind. But instead, he's just the artist, and I guess an actual designer was involved in this. Don't know who, not a name I recognize. Anyway, base concept of the game is you're one of these 5 characters, and you have this board, seeking to influence the selection of the next king. The old king is dying, and there's a number of different possible heirs to the throne. You can't be one of them. Out of those possible heirs, your objective is to get someone up to this spot, selected as the heir, whom you have the most influence over, and your influence over each of the different potential candidates is tracked on this board. So there's basically 2 values in play here. One is how well regarded each character is by the king, and then how well that character believes that you influenced their chances to the crown. Let's take a look at a few of the aspects of the boards. Each of these characters has their own special rules over here. So for example, let's take a look. Ulysses, the king's son, starts out with a very high rank, but he can only gain 1 standing per intrigue, and he loses an additional standing whenever he loses standing. Basically, he's penalized in the events of the game to make up for his high standing, but initially he's the front runner for the candidacy. Over on the character sheet, each character also has a special ability, and we can touch on those a little later, but then they have different starting locations for each of the different candidates as to how well they're liked, same as the candidates do with the king. And above each spot, there's possibly a money value. That's some money and support that you're going to receive from those candidates. Let's take a look at the rule book. It's a very long rule book, and to tell you the truth, most of it is just a lot of excess paper as far as I can tell. I mean, yeah, there's some background info and some pretty pictures and all of that. But for the most part, your rules are pretty much 2 to 4 pages. It could be a little fold-out sheet from what I can tell. There's still too much verbiage even in here. It's actually a very simple game, and let's take a look at what you do. Each player goes in turn, and on your turn, you have 3 things that you can do. 1, you can draw a card. And there's a couple of different kinds of cards. We'll take a look at them in a moment. Once you draw that card, well, if you don't want to draw a card, you can discard your entire hand and draw 4 new cards. Now, that becomes very valuable if you run out of cards, basically. But as long as you're holding cards, you probably don't want to discard more than 1 or 2 in order to get a redraw. It's more important to be cycling your cards, I think, and drawing new ones and getting to play, because you get an advantage out of playing, than it is to have the best hand to react to something. Okay, so if you discard your hand, you don't get the rest of your turn. That's your entire turn. And that's one of the big disadvantages of that. Okay, the second phase is patronage. This is pretty simple. You add up the money listed over each character, and you get that much cash. All right, then we go to the main step in the game. And in the main phase, there are a couple different kind of cards. There's event cards, which you can just play during your main stage, and the event takes place at that point. And there's not a lot more. They're fairly simple, and they're handled like that. Once on your turn, you're allowed to play an intrigue card. And this is really the meat of the game, how you change most of the values. The intrigue card, when you play it, it states a value, and this is going to be a vote value that's going to count towards your voting position on this. And this whole game is about voting. It's about secret bids or voting or whatever you want to call it. And it's an interesting mechanism for that. But then there's a little bit of background information on the card, which isn't too important. And then there's the effect if it passes. One candidate loses 2 standings, another gains 2. Okay? Well, obviously you might have candidates who favor you and you might want to boost them. There might be ones you don't like and you might want to decrease them. All this works into the strategy of the game and probably isn't of too much importance at this point, but there are reasons that you'd want to make these different decisions. But this card, if it passes, will have that effect. And when you play the card, you have to declare using the gain and loss markers which candidates are due to gain from this and which ones are due to lose. Then what happens, and I don't use these, but it comes with a little sheet of pad of paper and some pencils. You write down how many votes you're going to commit and whether or not you're voting for the event to pass or against it. Okay? Everybody turns up their secret bids and they're added up. And if more votes vote to pass it than vote to oppose it, the resolution will, or the effect will take, the event will take, the intrigue will take effect. And those changes will take effect. All right. But there's two little issues here. Let's look at the first one. You have to pay for whatever you bid. Okay? Now, the one player who put it in gets a free bid on the intrigue card. You also have, as sort of cash, let's see, influence cards, which are numbered cards, somewhat higher valued, that give you points towards a bid. And finally, in general, money counts 1 for 1 for vote, for bidding or voting or whatever. So whatever number you wrote down, you have to match that in cards, money, whatever. You can overpay. If you cannot physically pay, you have to show everything and you take some penalty or another. There are a couple of symbols on some of the intrigue cards. Some of them gold doesn't count at all, and some of them gold counts double. All, you know, just little pieces to fit into things. There may be some event cards that have kind of an interrupt type effect. I don't really remember. I don't think, maybe there aren't. Anyway. So the second piece that comes out of this is as soon as all the votes have been revealed, whoever put the most votes in, for or against, doesn't matter. If the effect takes place, whoever put the most votes, either for or against it, controls how all of the candidates react to it. All right? So candidates who gain think that somebody helped them. And candidates who lose know that somebody's scheming against them. But they don't really know who. And they trust whoever put the biggest vote in. That's the person who kind of controls the event at this point. That person picks, in the case of someone who gains standing, one player to thank for that. So whatever player put the most votes in gets to pick which player, anybody who's benefited by it, is seen as the person who's working behind the scenes for the candidate. And that person just gains a standing with that character. Likewise, anybody who took a penalty from a particular intrigue is also assigned someone that they blame by the person who put the most votes in, for or against, doesn't matter. And that person will lose. And that's one that can never happen actually due to special abilities, but that person can lose standing with the candidate. That's really the meat of the game. That's all there is to it. And it takes many, many pages to explain this. So the game ends when somebody reaches standing 10, and then whoever has the most favor with that candidate wins the game. If there's a tie, it's based on your intrigue cards that you're holding in your hand. It can also end if the last card of the deck is drawn, and at that point, the candidate with the highest rank at that moment is chosen. Same effect. And it's conceivable, if you have completely equivalent standing, for there to be a tie if you have the same money and intrigues and everything in your hand. Seems unlikely. Alright, what about special abilities? Well, these different characters have different special abilities. For example, Galahad always gives a plus to votes that'll increase his standing and a minus to any votes that'll decrease it. Now that could be a vote that affects many characters. We already touched Ulysses. Ariana's almost the opposite. Loses standing per intrigue, maximum, and gains an extra one when she gains. Archie can never go down from an intrigue, and therefore he'll never blame you. And Venetia, her bonus is she gives you some cash when she goes up in standing. If she sees that you helped her, she bestows an additional favor on you. And then the characters have their own advantages as well. The Taxman gets 3 extra gold whenever he collects patronage. His starting money is also increased by that. The Wizard can buy additional cards from the deck during his turn, just 1 per turn. The Ambassador, this is huge and is disallowed in the 2-player game, I think, because it's so potent. The Ambassador can never lose standing with candidates due to being blamed for intrigues. He just can't be selected for the blame. The Squire can put a vote in, and he gets sort of 2 free votes. He bids them, but he doesn't have to pay for 2 of the votes, essentially. And the Royalist, when they gain standing, they can pay money to gain a second standing with that character. That's the whole of the game. I've played it once 2-player, actually twice, once totally screwing it up. And it's kind of an interesting, really fast-paced game 2-player where, you know, in the first turn or two, if somebody can outmaneuver the other person, make them play cards and not get much, the game is essentially over. Because whoever's, you know, if you can knock one person's cash producing out of the way, they're not going to be able to do well in the game easily. I'm going to play it here 5-player, and I think it's going to be a lot easier to catch up. Alright, well, I'll give it a shot, see what it works out like.